I'm sure you've all heard that there are three branches of government within inside the United States. Three branches of government, and they're very long names, such as executive, legislative, and judicial. And I know for many people who aren't that active politically, these words become a bit difficult to remember, and it becomes hard to understand what's going on. So let's take a step back and try to understand simply. In the US government, you have three branches of different government which have shared powers, and they also have checks and balances, meaning that these three branches of our government check and balance each other, and they have powers that are not, there's no one branch of government that has all the power, rather the powers are shared, and there's checks and balances with that. So as I talked about in the last slide, what does government do? We basically make and pass laws, and we collect taxes. Okay, so who determines that? Well, this is the first branch of government, which is called the legislative branch. The legislative branch of government is basically a large group of people. In the federal government, it's 100 senators and 435 representatives, and they basically get together and they argue, debate, and figure out what laws are going to be passed and how money is going to be spent from the taxes that they collect. That's all it does. And again, it makes complete logical sense. So if if you want to pass a law in your masjid, or if you want to pass something, you have a committee of people, and they kind of sit around, they figure out, okay, what rules are we going to pass for our masjid? What are the guidelines and what are the principles? They sit around, they discuss it, and of course they're getting revenue from donations that are coming in, so they then determine how those donations are spent through the budgeting. That's what the legislative branch does. They have to determine what are the issues in the country, how can we pass laws to address those issues, and we're collecting all this money from taxes, how do we spend that money? And of course, these people, how are they determined? They are given their position by you and I. When we vote for our senators and our House of Representative members, we basically determine who are the people that are going to make the laws and basically determine how taxes are spent within inside the government. So again, the legislative branch are the one that discuss everything, make the laws, and then of course set the budgets, and it kind of goes from there. The next branch of government is called the executive branch of government. The executive branch of government is where the president operates, or the governor operates, or in local level the mayor operates, or whatever the local title for that person is. So it makes logical sense to have an executive branch, because you've got these groups of people who are basically debating all day and figuring out how laws are passed and setting budgets, and then you have to have a branch of government that then executes it. So it's like, okay, if a law is passed, well, who's going to make sure it's enforced? Who's going to make sure that people are actually following the laws, and that there are departments, law enforcement, military, and others to make sure that the laws are passed and that the country is safe and things work effectively? That's where the executive branch of government comes in. Of course, the executive branch of government also has a role to play in laws that are being passed. Again, the president has to sign off on laws, or of course he can veto laws. We're not going to talk too much about that, but the idea is that ability to also sign on or veto is a check that the executive branch has on the legislative branch. But of course, the legislative branch can also overturn the executive branch, so on and so forth. So again, let's take a step back. Legislative branch, House members, senators, who basically spend all day debating and arguing over issues and figure out what laws are going to be passed and how the money is going to be spent from the taxes they collect. The executive branch job is, okay, these are the laws, this is how the budget is going to be spent. Okay, it's my job to make sure that that's done properly. Guess what? Because we live in a very complex society, because laws can be interpreted differently, because they can be enforced differently, you need to have somebody who's judging and figuring out what's right and what's wrong. And that's where the third branch of government comes in, which is the judicial branch. The judicial branch on the federal level is where the Supreme Court is, and these 9 judges will basically determine what laws are constitutional or unconstitutional, what laws can basically move forward or not go forward. And it makes total logical sense, because you have one body who's basically making the laws, but again, anything that people make, the way it is on paper and the way it's executed or enacted might be different. And of course, there might be some laws that counteract other laws, right? So it's the judicial branch to be like, okay, well, here are the laws, and we're going to determine how these laws are interpreted and what goes where and things of that, and what's constitutional and not constitutional. And they're the judges, and they're the one that basically are the final decision makers in how these rules are passed. So again, even though we have 3 branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, I hope you understand how really logical it is. You need one group of people that makes the laws and figures out the financial budget, one group of people whose job it is to basically execute those laws and make sure people are actually following them and things are being carried out. And then you need somebody to kind of judge and make sure that when issues or conflicts come up, all right, come to us and we'll figure it out, inshallah. So that is how these three branches of government works.